God bless Joe Manchin. He is the last holdout standing between standing between America and the abyss. He single-handedly is keeping this country from going off the cliff. And while I may be, a little hyperbolic in my verbiage, in a way, I really do mean that. Because right now, we've got that 50-50 Senate I talked about. And if the Democrats want to do anything that is, really gonna cut into the other side, which they want to do, they want to really, turn the screws on the American right. They're gonna need to go through Joe Manchin. And Joe Manchin today came out against two very important things. The first one was so-called expanded background checks, which you always have to get a background check for a gun anyway, unless you're giving it as a gift to somebody or something like that, or you're selling to somebody, private sale or whatever. But pretty much every gun is going to be, you have to get a background check. Everyone knows that, and everyone knows that the so-called expanded background check thing is a ploy to get gun registration. That's what it's always meant. It's meant that for a very long time. And of course, Joe Manchin, being the savvy Machiavellian politician he is, understands that the people of West Virginia are not going to fall for the expanded background check BS. The people of West Virginia would go insane if Joe Manchin, their senator, voted to make them all register their guns. And so he, not wanting to lose his job, said, you know what? My voters really, really would hate this, so I'm going to vote against it. And it's great because the Democrats, who think of him as an ally, are just like, oh my gosh, how could you do it? Blah, blah, they don't understand it. And it's not like Joe Manchin's a good person. I don't think that. I don't think he really cares about the Second Amendment that much. I think he cares about winning and understands that, hey, I'm from West Virginia, where people like guns. And the so-called expanded background checks gun registration program is the most pernicious and dangerous gun control measure that is ever proposed. Because if that gets through, that's the foot in the door that the government needs to then come back at the next point in which they have a chance to erode some of our gun rights and just take everything, just start confiscating whole classes of firearms because they know everybody who owns them and where they are. So to me, this was a do or die situation. Either we stop the registration here, or things can get really, really bad. Now, all that scenario that I discussed yesterday about Biden putting in a bunch of really bad gun control things and getting them signed into law, passed through Congress, and then states having to nullify them, that is partially out the window now, thankfully. The nullification crisis has been partially averted by Joe Manchin, who understands that, at least in West Virginia, but also in many of the other 50 states, these gun laws that they want to put through, especially the ones that Biden was calling for, a so-called assault weapons ban and a magazine ban, totally untenable, and is not going to be enforceable in all 50 states. Now, what is the White House's response to all this? Well, apparently, Biden is planning some kind of executive gun control. Now, the powers of the president are not so... I don't think that he would push the envelope so much to try and just pass sign an executive order saying, ban assault weapons. I don't think that he could go that far in an executive order. I don't think the Biden administration is that bold, and of course it wouldn't hold up in court, obviously. Well, what they could try and get away with is the same thing that George H.W. and George W. Bush got away with, which is which is essentially banning guns from importation, because the ATF controls the importation of firearms and things. And I was reading an article, I think Fox maybe was having it, and they were talking about this. But that's a pretty logical thing because, again, presidents have done it in the past. Republican presidents, essentially George H.W. Bush was the originator of the assault weapons ban. It's just he did it only on imported guns. So essentially, if you want your AR-15, it better be made in America, damn it. That was George H.W. Bush's opinion. Of course, I believe he publicly burned his NRA card because he thought the NRA was too pro Second Amendment. I mean, what a jerk. Because before George H.W. Bush, there were some pretty cool guns being imported into the United States from places like China. Not anymore, though. And then George W. Bush went all the way by essentially saying, as far as Norinco is concerned, no guns made by Norinco. It's illegal. Can't have them. And, I'm a big fan of Norinco guns, personally. They're hard to come by because they, I believe he said, they have to be in a neutral country, parked there for 20 years before they can be imported into the United States. And so Norinco guns do trickle in to the United States, but they're very, they're pretty scarce relative to how they were before George W. Bush. And so what Biden can do is, I guess, whatever's left of your ability to import so-called assault weapons, or I guess any gun, Biden can just try and start banning guns anywhere just so that he can say he's doing something. Maybe he'll say, okay, no more importing semi-auto pistols, no more importing semi-auto anything, no more importing magazines over 10-round capacity. And that would suck. It would be annoying, especially if you have a gun that is a non-American gun, and all of a sudden now you can't get magazines for it anymore. There's a lot of annoying stuff that could come from this. No more Wassers, I guess. No more barrels from Poland. You wouldn't have any imported. You probably wouldn't have any imported relatively modern guns at all. No more imported AKs at all. You'd all have to go, I guess, to Palmetto State Armory, which, from what I understand, they kind of make some pretty good AKs. But it's not going to be a barrel. We already can't get Segas. I guess was that during Obama, or was that Trump that banned the Segas? I remember back when you could get Segas. That was pretty cool. You could buy a Russian AK. But even those, because of the W ban, they had to have so many American parts on them that when they came over from Russia, they hardly looked like an AK. But again, were these infringements on our rights? Yes. They're very clearly infringements because you had to jump through hoops in order to get your guns, but ultimately you could still get your guns. So, for example, whatever Biden wants to do as far as importations goes of magazines, really not going to affect AR-15s. The AR-15 is an American design. Most of the manufacturers are in America. The magazines are made in America. They used to be made in Colorado. Then Colorado got really blue, and so Magpul said, we see the writing on the wall. We're going to go to South Carolina. Smart move on their part. We also have, let me think, in South Carolina, they also got the guys who make the G3 rifles. What are they called? PTR Industries. So if you're in South Carolina, you're pretty well set, because even if they did an assault weapons ban, through the federal government, South Carolina probably would be okay, because through interstate commerce, they manufacture magazines and they manufacture rifles, because they also have Palmetto State Armory. They make AKs and ARs. So you have Magpul making magazines. You've got PTR making rifles too. You're pretty well set if you're in South Carolina and they do a federal assault weapons ban. Then all South Carolina has to do is sanctuary state, pass a sanctuary state law, and then they have their own domestic gun industry. The only thing I guess that would be hard for them is getting ammunition, which somebody would have to set up ammunition things. That, now that I think about it, the last lead smelter in the United States closed, which is a problem. So that would be an issue. But you'd need the entire arms industry kind of within your one state. But again, right now we're not talking about that. Any sort of law passed by Congress is out the window. So now we only have to really worry about what Biden would do by executive order. Now, something else that I talked about a few weeks ago is regarding a Biden executive gun control order was to do with so-called ghost guns, i.e. 80% lowers and polymer 80 Glock frames. And I guess there are 80% 1911s too, but I've never heard of anyone actually building one. It sounds kind of like a nightmare to me. To me, I like 1911s for historical purposes, so building a custom 1911 not really appealing to me. But then again, I feel the same way about Glocks and ARs. I'm not one of, I'm a history buff kind of guy. I'm not one of these tactical type people. So, I'm not, most of your gun, I wouldn't be someone who'd go to a gun shop, really, and be interested in what they sell these days. I grew up watching Ian from Forgotten Weapons since the very early days of his channel. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff I like. And, if I'm going to go out and buy guns, it's going to be old stuff that would be grandfathered in anyway. I mean, I'll have a lot more interest in bolt actions than, these scary-looking guns that Joe Biden is looking to ban. But, my personal interests are beside the point. Now, the other thing is, because nothing's getting through Congress, whatever Biden tries to do by executive order will have to be limited because he doesn't have much authority. If he already went to Congress and he said, hey, Congress, do this, and Congress said, no, we're not going to do that, which is what just happened, it's not going to get through the Senate. So Congress is saying no to gun control. Then Biden says, well, I want to do gun control anyway. Well, then, you kind of look like a sore loser then. You can't really do much. It's kind of like DACA, although I guess Obama got away with DACA because Obama said to Congress, pass the DREAM Act. And Congress didn't pass the DREAM Act. And then Obama said, well, I'm just going to not deport so-called dreamers. And then there you go. Now they're here forever. But that's the president abstaining from doing something. It's not the president going out of his way and saying, I'm going to take an action. Because what Obama did was he said Congress essentially had written a law saying, hey, these people have to be deported. Obama said, I'm not going to deport those people. Or rather, I'm not going to deport them right now. I'll deport them last. I'm going to get rid of everybody else who's bad first. And then these people, I'm going to save them for last. And they'll go to the bottom of the list to be deported. Whereas if you want to do an executive order on gun control, you're saying to Congress, hey, Congress, let me do this thing that I want to do. And Congress says, no, you're not allowed to do that. And then the president says, well, I'm going to do it anyway. It's very different than deferring action on childhood arrivals. So again, not a lot of legitimacy there. So I mean, there's not a whole lot you could do. I mean, let's say Biden went crazy and said, I'm going to ban assault weapons by executive order. Totally unenforceable. It's going to be meaningless. I mean, it would destroy the credibility of the presidency. I would love to see Biden sign an executive order saying, we're going to ban these assault weapons and get these weapons of war. We're going to get them off the streets. And he just signs an executive order. I'd love to see that because it's not going to be effective. Now, of course, the irony is Donald Trump signed a lot more executive orders to harm the Second Amendment than Barack Obama did. I mean, I yearn for the days of Obama. Those were the good old days, in my memory. Other than Obamacare, once Obamacare was over, nothing bad really happened while Obama was president in the United States. Now, he did horrible things in the Middle East, unspeakable things in the Middle East. The Yemen war for one, but the drone war in general. I mean, I could go on for a long time about the evils of Barack Obama. But if you're an American living here, he didn't do a whole lot. The Republicans did a good job of blocking him after the first 2 years. And other than DACA, I don't think his executive orders, I don't remember him doing a whole lot that was super egregious. He didn't sign any executive orders banning guns and things. I mean, I guess the worst thing that happened under Obama was the 7N6 ban. It was a ban on a specific kind of ammunition for a certain gun. Which was, corrosive, and I'm not particularly interested in corrosive ammo anyway. And you could buy brand new ammo that was non-corrosive for not quite as cheap, but still really, really darn cheap. It was, 545 by 39 back at the time. Everything's expensive now, but back at the time, 545 by 39, even though if you couldn't get 7N6, brand new 5.5 was very, very, very cheap. Trump had his bump stock ban, which was stupid, shouldn't have happened. It was much more egregious than the 7N6 ban because, 7N6, you could still have it. They just couldn't import more of it into the United States. Trump overnight turned everyone who owned a bump ski, which people have bought for years and years and years, and put companies out of business who manufactured them, which, there wasn't anything, they were just toys, essentially. There wasn't much practical use to them. The Vegas shooter used them. Of course, we're not allowed to know the motivation of the Vegas shooter. We're not allowed to know anything about him. All we know is that he seemed to, he wore a pussy hat, like the women at the Women's March, and then he went and shot up a country music concert. I'll let you draw your own conclusions, because, the FBI certainly hasn't let us in on what their conclusions, they drew. So in response, Trump decided to just turn anyone who owned a bump stock into a felon overnight. Absurd, huge overreach of power. And maybe Biden would do something similar. Maybe Biden, what he would do is make all these unserialized so-called ghost guns illegal and turn all of the people who own them felons overnight. I guess that would be interesting. I'm not sure what would happen in that case. Because the precedent of the bump stock thing was so egregious that they completely redefined the definition of a machine gun, and completely destroyed, what had been the legal definition of a machine gun forever. They just threw that out the window because they wanted to say that bump stocks are a machine gun, which they're not. So I don't know what they would do with this ghost gun ban. If they just said, okay, everyone who owns an 80% lower, that's now illegal. Well, I mean, how do you determine what's an 80% lower? What if they put their own serial number on there? I mean, as long as a gun has a serial number on it of some kind, doesn't really matter if it has a manufacturer's name on it or whatever. I mean, there's no law about that. I mean, how would they enforce this? I guess if you get caught with an unserialized AR, maybe then they could. I don't know. Maybe what they would do is they would just ban new sales. I guess that would be the simple thing to do. If they wouldn't necessarily go full draconian like Trump and just declare everyone who owns them a felon, because maybe the Democrats would say, that's a bit harsh to just take all these law-abiding citizens and tell them now you're a felon. So I'm not going to come right out and say that gun control was defeated, because people, they shouldn't let their guard down. But this is a very good day for the Second Amendment. Yes, Joe Biden's going to try and do whatever he can bad to harm gun rights. But again, considering I think that the final end, we're reaching the end game of the U.S. federal government, if they make some slight rule changes here or there regarding importations and things, people who already have guns, they don't really have to worry about whatever's going to happen out of this. We're not facing an extinction level event anytime soon. And so to the extent that the Second Amendment will be weakened in the short term, I think that, in the long term, or in the medium term, I shouldn't say long term, in the medium term, we will see those losses recovered through the dissolution of the federal government, which I think is going to occur around the time of the next financial crisis, because the longevity of the federal government is directly tied to the credibility of the Federal Reserve and the power of the Federal Reserve. And the Fed clearly is losing control over the situation. This is not a financial video, but it's very, very important to understand that if the Fed loses control, essentially, you're going to lose the U.S. federal government. It's going to be meaningless. It's going to be essentially just a piece of paper, or it'll be. I mean, it's already just an abstract construct, but it will cease to exist if they no longer have financial power. And because the Fed has never, is not allowing this business cycle to end, they are eating into their own, their own capital. Pardon the, poor phrase there, but they're eating away at their own power, cannibalizing themselves to try and keep this business cycle going to the point to where the business cycle will end when the Fed itself, collapses, when the whole dollar system collapses. We will not have a meaningful recession until then. And I mean, we're in a recession now, but people's purchasing power is, supposedly being replaced by government stimulus. People are not losing their homes despite the fact that they're not paying. These are all things that are not sustainable in the medium term, even. I shouldn't, none of this garbage was sustainable in the long term, but again, this is the stuff that medium term is not sustainable. Once the foreclosures start happening, once people start having to pay their mortgage again, once people's expenses start going up, once the inflation premium starts eating into interest rates, we're going to have much bigger problems to worry about this country than enforcing gun laws, or especially unconstitutional ones signed, by executive order in Washington. Nobody's going to care about that crap. There's going to be pandemonium in the streets. It's going to be good luck trying to find food on your grocery store shelves. That's the kind of chaos that the impending financial collapse will bring. So stay positive and keep your heads held high, and say a prayer for Joe Manchin.